Hey, welcome to another podcast of Main Contained Fishing with Beanie Outdoors and myself. And tonight we've got Mr. Shan O'Gorman, the aquatic biologist, on the show with us tonight. And we'd like to welcome him. Hopefully, he can teach us how to grow big fish in our honey holes. He's been on quite a few podcasts here lately, and we just get him over on ours and for our group of listeners and viewers to ask him questions. So if you have any questions of it, just put them in the comments and we'll get to them. So welcome, Mr. Shan. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing real well. Thanks for having me on the show.
So certainly.
I think I might. I need to push the buttons right to try to get I don't see the chat, or should I not see the chat? Oh, there it is. Okay, there we go.
Got it. Okay.
Have to switch it from private to.
Yeah, well, I went to full screen, I think is what it was, and it cut it off. Yeah. I'm learning, guys, man. I'm technically challenged. Sorry about that.
So tell us just give us a little background of yourself, and that way everybody knows, and
okay.
Kind of just get it started for us.
Okay. Talk about yourself. Go. Well, like you said, I've done quite a few of these podcasts, so I've got a little spiel about that. I've been a bass fisherman, though, since the late 70s. My dad took me as a real little guy, to ponds locally around Georgia. And Georgia's a unique state. I don't know, because not everybody's from Georgia and kind of understands Georgia. There's a lot of ponds in Georgia. And I mean, by a lot, I mean like 1 million, literally. And they were built many years ago by the state to help with erosion control. So back in like the 40s, 50s, I think even into the 60s, if you own property and wanted a pond, you could work out a deal where the state of Georgia would come build a pond for you on your property. And that got us an unnaturally, abnormally high number of ponds in the state of Georgia. And that's why we have such good pond fishing. So much pond fishing in Georgia was because of that program from years ago. So growing up in Georgia, there was always ponds around because of that. And I fished in those ponds and then learned through my late teens and early 20s that you could major in fisheries biology, kind of learned that was a thing, never had heard of it before, and decided that I wanted to do that and went to Georgia. That was the only program, fisheries program in Georgia that you could get the degree, and went there and got just a wonderful degree from the University of Georgia in fisheries biology, fisheries management. Some people it might be called wildlife and fisheries management. A lot of our classes had deer talks and turkeys and game birds, and I got to study a lot of different interesting things. It was out of the forestry school over there at Georgia, the Warnell School of Forestry. So you can study any number of wonderful animals. And I was just fortunate enough to get in there and study fish. And then from there started a pond management company and built that up, ran it for about 20 years and sold it. And was fortunate to work with most of those ponds weren't like fisheries management type ponds. You know what I mean? Like right. A lot of those ponds would be like maybe in a homeowners association or an apartment complex that nobody really cared about the fishing, and you weren't really being paid to manage the pond for fishing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Normally in that situation, I just me personally, I'd be dinking around if it needed a bass, we needed a few bass in it. I'd be throwing a few bass in it, so I did a lot of pond management like that on the sly, where I'd be taking some out, putting some in, see what happens, learning that way. But that was always the fun part of the job for me, was the fisheries management portion of it. Unfortunately for me and for all of us in this, and like anybody who happens to follow my page, they think that that's what you do as a fisheries biologist. And then it's like, no, that's maybe 10% of what you do. There's other things like dredging and aquatic weed control and water testing and a lot of things that are unfun with those jobs, not just fish management,
Right. Yeah. So before we got the broadcast going, I was showing Shannon a map of some ponds that we have that I have access to fish, and we're trying to get some of the ponds, one big pond on there, to kind of get in better shape. And we were discussing growing your own bait fish. Either it be brim, shad, whatever you want to grow as a bait fish to put in there, right? Mm-hmm. So what is your take on growing? If you had an established place and you had a smaller body of water where you could grow your own bait fish to transport them into the larger, what is your take on that?
We talked about that because you had a situation where you had kind of a pond really close to another pond, and you could kind of get away with it there, and that's my take on it. That was, I wouldn't recommend that you go spending money to try to achieve that, but that particular setup on that overhead, on that satellite video we were looking at, I've seen that work out where you can grow your own. The particular guy I'm thinking of had shiners in there, so he had his own live bait all the time. You know what I mean? It was a separate pond, but very close, and they never mixed, and the bass couldn't get in there with him and wreck him. So he had a very good live bait supply. Of course, that's in Florida too, where having shiners can be very beneficial to the tune of $2 a shiner. You take that same pond to Northeast Georgia, nobody buys shiners, so nobody really cares,
Right. Yeah.
So again, depending on where you are and the situation that you're in, but I wouldn't recommend that you specifically build a pond, and I definitely don't recommend trying to get guys away from the idea of stocking forage to achieve bass growth. Okay. So I love the fact that we got to start this conversation talking about a pond, talking about something in real life, something you've worked on, you've gone out and gotten results on. We're not having a conversation based in the hypothetical. We're having a conversation based on real world experience, right? And that's where I like my conversations, and that's where I try to guide my conversations on my pages and the things that I'm doing. And so like right now, one of the projects that's going is Sugar Hill. It was stock new, built new, stock new. And there's another way to stock your pond new, and I'll recommend it to you as well. You can just drain it. You can just go out there, pull the drain down, make sure that everything's right with the drain. That's actually not a bad idea. You check everything. You can add habitat. You can do dredging easier. There's absolutely nothing wrong with draining down a man-made pond. And when you do it, drain it dry. You don't want any fish being left over, because when you restock the fish, the important part is the balance of the fishery. How many bait fish are in there versus how many predatory fish are in there. So we're actually tracking that in real time right now, or we have been the last, couple years at Sugar Hill. And so far, our biggest bass, though they were stocked at 5 inches in May of 2022, And this past fall, so they had last, summer and fall to grow, and then this spring, fall, or spring through fall to grow. So they've had 2 growing seasons, and we've had a couple bass over 4 pounds. So getting 2 pounds of growth a year. Now, not all the bass are growing at that rate, but not all the bass are the same genetics either. So that being said, that 2 pounds growth a year is something that I've achieved before, and I've actually done a little better than that. Again, different places, different genetics, different situations, but 2 pounds growth a year is I consider good, and I consider me doing my job pretty good. You know what I mean?
Right.
And what I did though, let's break that down. I stocked the pond. I stocked it the right way. I stocked it once. I haven't added anything else. I haven't put any supplemental forage in it. I haven't added crawfish from someplace else. I haven't brought in nothing. I stocked the pond. I fed the bluegill. I got a good balance in the fishery, and I let it go. Now I do feed the bluegill, every day, regularly through the growing seasons, and that's the trick right there, the consistency in the feeding. But that's it. I'm not stocking anything else. Okay. Now take my growth rates and do that. And now go look at one of those other dudes who did do all those other things. He stocked tilapia, he stocked rainbow trout, he stocked crawfish, he stocked this, he stocked that. But his growth rate's not 2.1 pounds per season. You see what I'm saying? He's
Right.
not outgrowing me. They're not, and I've seen that time and time again. When you do this right, when you do pond management exactly right, and you do it the smart way, just like I did at Sugar Hill, you can't beat it with money. You can't. It's weird, but it's Mother Nature. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Money doesn't beat Mother Nature.
Right. And in talking about stocking a new pond too, and versus the South versus the North, because Mike's from Vermont area, so because you have 2 different type. I wouldn't say qualities of water, but you have different seasons. You have Mike has 4 seasons up there, where in South Georgia and Florida you might have just 2 seasons, right? So is that the reason why the bass population up north doesn't get as big as because of the fluctuation of the temperatures and the way the metabolism on the bass work? And
I think it depends on what part of up north you're referring to as up north. Once you go into the up north part of up north, where you've got northern pike and muskie, the bass just become part of the food chain. Like no difference than a bluegill. They're just one step above a bluegill. So where we're down here in Georgia and Florida and even Virginia and Kentucky and all those places and south of there, we're dealing with bass as the top predator in the food chain. But when you get up north, now you're dealing with you're not dealing with the same thing at all,
Right.
and literally basket eaten at a younger size.
Do you feel as, and Mike, you can jump in on this for me because I don't know how the state fisheries work up there, but
yeah, I don't think I do, but I could.
Yeah, but do you feel that the states don't put enough into their fisheries to help with the growth of, I don't care if it's bass, brim, catfish, or whatever. Do you feel like the states don't put enough effort into their fishing industry as they could?
For me up here, and I can answer from a Vermont or Northeast standpoint, the problem we have up here is that they're very specific on the species that they do care about. And it seems funny because as a bass fisherman and as somebody who lives 20 minutes from Lake Champlain, this little lake that's very not known for bass, they don't give a shit about the bass in that lake. They don't stock the bass. They don't build habitats for the bass. They don't do anything for bass. They stock landlocked salmon and lake trout.
Mm-hmm.
They don't do anything at all to help the bass, which is funny to me because I understand that we have a lot of trout streams, we have a lot of fly fishing and stuff like that, but bass is a huge revenue maker for the state that, in my personal opinion, Vermont specifically just overlooks and ignores. And I think honestly though, and you could probably, like, being someone who's on the science side, it's probably mostly because bass are more hardy than a trout, so they will spawn on their own. So, like, trout, like, they need special care. Salmon need special care. Salmon need, if I'm not exactly 100%, but I know a little bit from, like, salmon need, like, a special soil and a specific place to spawn. They can't just go spawn. Whereas a bass could spawn on a dock piling. It doesn't really matter where they are. Is that right? Or am I wrong on that?
No, man, you're all over it. It's a very astute observation because most guys don't get it. They get on the high horse part of it. We need to protect all the fish. And of course, I don't manage smallmouth bass. I live below that line. I don't have those. And to my knowledge, they don't really you don't really have smallmouth bass in ponds up north, do you? They're usually more like rivers and bigger lakes up there, right?
We actually do, but it's random. So
right.
I will say I don't think the smallmouth naturally were in those ponds.
It takes a unique pond to hold a smallmouth. How about that?
Yes, yeah, they're not in. So we have multiple. We have a lot of glacial stuff up here. So we have a lot of stuff that was carved out.
Yeah.
So the more clear water, deeper fisheries, you will find smallmouth in.
Right.
But for the most part, it's largemouth because, and actually, it's probably a good question for you. But, like, I've kind of observed that, but I've never really known that to be true. Is that I find that smallmouth don't do well in muddy water, and they don't do well.
It's going to be certain habitat. They're going to do well usually around, like, rocky deep ledges.
Yep.
And when you don't have rocky deep ledges, you usually don't have very happy smallmouth.
Yeah, and that's what I found is even in the lakes. So we have a lot of lakes that are mixed. But what it is like we have lakes that'll literally be like the north end will be all smallies. You'll catch smallies all day. And then you go to the southern side or like the more weedy, mucky side, that's where the largemouth are. And they don't really commingle. So that makes sense because the bottom contour is probably what they're relating to the rocks. So that's why they're up where the rocks are. That makes sense.
Well, you also would be dealing with just like, and again, I've only caught smallies a few times, thoroughly enjoyed them, but I do have pretty good experience with spotted bass. And I think they're kind of similar in their behavior, in like a schooling type of fish, strong pack feeder type of fish, and you'll see the exact same thing in Georgia in the highland reservoirs between the largemouths and the spots. It's like on Lake Lanier, you can call it. Like you go back, you see some weeds coming up on the edge. You see some, vegetation on the bottom. You're kind of up in a finger and you're like, okay, we'll probably see a largemouth bass back here. And boom, you'll catch one. You go out on the main lake points in 30 feet, of water with all rock. It's all spots out there. You don't see the largemouths out there very much at all.
It's the same thing here as, like you said, the deeper areas. Now there is areas that are like there's one pond. It's actually funny and from someone who understands the biology of it, there was a pond that they actually had such a bad problem with milfoil they capped it for 10 years. So you were saying earlier, like draining it. It's kind of the same idea. Like they literally put like a mat over the whole thing.
Yeah.
And just killed everything because it was so bad.
Yeah,
and then
do nothing with it. Yeah.
That lake has smallmouth in it, but I don't think it originally had smallmouth in it.
Huh.
I think when they restocked it,
right,
I think they threw them in there because they also wanted to try to make this a trout lake because there's a lot of, let's just say, rich people that live along the outside of it.
Yeah.
And I think they tried to make it a trout fishery, but the deepest part of it is like 16 feet.
Oh,
it's
right.
not deep. In the summertime, even in Vermont, it's too shallow and the water temps get too high and it kills off those trout.
Well, I can I guess the point to tie what you're saying together to what we just talked about on this 2 acre pond, it's 2.5, but when you drain a pond down, you start it from scratch, or you build a brand new pond, you start it from scratch. Either way, you're starting it from scratch. And what's important is you're putting like a certain amount of bait fish in there. You're allowing them to grow up for a certain period of time, and then you're putting a certain amount of bass in there. And it's really no different than anything in nature. Like if you wanted to grow cattle, you can only have so many cows per acre.
Yeah.
You can only have so many fish per acre. It's literally, taught the same way. There's only so many deer per acre in the woods. That's wildlife biology, right? So when we first initially set the pond up right on those new stocks, you've set it up perfect. And since it's new, you don't have to go buy bigger, more expensive fish. You can buy the smaller fish, put them on feed, grow them up, because everything's really expensive these days, using fish included. Right. So you can set your pond up, and then once you do it that way, like for the amount of growth that you get, like we're seeing right here, we've got some bass are at over 4 pounds in 2 growing seasons. We're going to have bass at the end of next year, at the end of in their 3rd fall, probably 7 pounds. And huge fish, nice fish. And the larger, this is only a 2.5 acre pond. The larger the pond, once you get up to like 10, 12, 15, 20 acres, the bigger they get, the actually really more incredible the fishing gets. If you can just take that leap of faith and drain it and start it and do it right. There's a process to it, but every time I've ever seen it done right, the fishing is just so incredibly world class. You certainly, on some of I'm talking about some of the 20 to 25 acre lakes that I've seen drained, 2 10-pound bass coming off the same blowdown with the electrofishing boats. You know what I mean? Just boom, boom, just right there together. Same day stuff, same blowdown, same brush pile, same minute of the day. They're right there. Ridiculous catch rates. And the nicest thing, I think, and as I've noticed, and there's a lot of kind of influencer type people moving towards pond content. And I'm glad to see it, because you'll find every single one of these ponds, yes, they're all similar, but they also are all different.
Yep.
And they all kind of tell their own story. And that kind of makes me think about what you were talking about managing lakes. It gets to a point, like when we're talking about a 2.5 acre pond, we're talking about something I completely control, like this. Okay. Even if it got totally wrecked and out of hand, I just drain it, start it over, just and start it over the way I need it to go again. Okay. It doesn't get out of hand. Okay. It doesn't get out of my control. 5 acre lake, I can do the same thing. A 10, I can do the same thing. A 20, okay, yeah, but it depends. And the bigger those get, the more outside of like complete control you have. So when you start getting up into hundreds of acres of water and I don't care what you want to do, if you want to stock forage or you want to remove fish to try to balance the fish population, that's the part where guys get completely lost into the amount of effort that actually takes. And we can learn a little bit about that effort from our ponds, on our bass heavy ponds, when it's like, okay, you got a 25 acre pond that's bass heavy, go get 400 bass out of it this season and do not put them back in. And that's where when the rubber hits the road like that for guys, and they're going like, hey, wait a minute, we've all been fishing our butts off and we've got 200 bass out and we're not even halfway to where we need to be by the fall. This takes a significant amount of filleting fish and fishing. And this isn't just something you're going out and doing and having a good time with the boy. It becomes a job in a hurry.
Yeah.
And that circles me back to the drain it, start it from scratch, spend a little bit of money, get it balanced perfectly, make your life easier, and have something that you get top dollar for you get a perfect growth. You get 12-pound fish in 4.5 years, that kind of stuff,
Now, when you have a pond, so say, I'm just going to put like round numbers. I know this is like way under, but just to make the math easier. So say you have a pond with 50 fish. Could all 50 of those essentially be 10-pounders? Or is there always going to be a balance of like, can only be 3 10-pounders and 2 2-pounders? Like, could they all grow up, or is there always got to be a balance to?
You'll always find like a distribution of balance, right? Like some fish get bigger than other fish, right? So right now in this pond that I'm managing, about half the fish I stocked were Florida bass. About half the fish I stocked were northern bass. The funny thing about it is these fish are not in Florida. They're in North Georgia. That's where the pond is. And I've noticed this, like people think it's been a really good project for kind of busting misinformation, because people automatically assume that the Florida bass are going to crush the northerns and outgrow them, but they didn't. They're the ones who are the smaller ones, because because of the way the winters have worked out, the way the weather patterns have worked out. It's cooler up. We've had some cool weather stuff happen to them probably. And the northern bass are more aggressive, feeding harder. And the northern bass, we have them tagged. I have them pit tagged. They scan and beat like a product at a store. So we know what's what. And the northern bass are crushing them by pounds of growth, just really far away ahead of them.
That's interesting. So do you think now these bass were actually like originally like born in the north, like they were relocated from the north, or were they always in a hatchery?
No, these fish came from a fish hatchery.
Okay.
It's called Titan bass.
Okay.
They're out of South Georgia. And I guess the best way to describe it is it's like Dr. Evil's Bass Laboratory down there.
Okay.
The dude that's into that place. If you know what I'm talking about, have you been down there, Daniel?
No, I haven't been down there, but I've read some articles and actually watched some videos on how they crossbreed stuff, and it's just like, what are you doing?
Dude, I'm telling you, it is Dr. Evil's Bass Laboratory down there. One of the guys that used to follow the page, he worked there, but then he left. And I'm not even sure like what I'm supposed to talk about, what I'm not supposed to talk about from going in there. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to talk about anything in there, but I can promise you it is absolutely the most advanced fish hatchery I have ever seen. And what's unique about it, I can't talk about this. So what we've got is, let's go back to most of my career. Okay. You got a pond in your backyard, it's 5 acres. You just built it. You stocked it. Let's grow some bass. All right, great. What I would do is exactly the same things I did here. Stock the bluegill, get them going, get them on feed, let them grow up 6 months, a year, go get the bass when they become available in the spring. And I'd get F1s. And F1's a cross between a Florida and a northern. And they grow like rockets. Like, nothing outgrows an F1. And you put those in ponds. The problem is the F1 genetics, they revert back to like their northern or their Florida, or, kind of their genetics kind of, they don't exhibit what's called hybrid vigor. It's just that first generation of F1s grow at extraordinary rates, and then their offspring grow at like more normal rates. So with this pond project, the whole idea was, okay, we put Floridas in there, we put northerns in there. So now for the last 2 years, we've watched northerns absolutely cook the Floridas off in growth. But what's really interesting is what is the growth going to be like on the fish coming up, the reproduction getting born in, because any of the northerns that cross with the Floridas, those are F1s.
So you're actually basically creating your own F1s instead of stocking them. That makes
Right.
sense.
Well, that's the idea. I'm trying to create them, but I know this for a fact. If I can get a Florida fish to cross with a northern fish on the beds, the F1s are going to outcompete them. Everybody's dying. No lying. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The F1s are going to win. You know what I mean? That much I know about them. So this is an attempt to get F1s born into the system naturally over time. And that to me is a really cool pond genetics project.
That is cool. So now, out of curiosity, if it could I like if as someone as a novice, is there like a pattern? Like, is an F1 look different, or does it look like a largemouth?
Oh no, you
There's no way
can't
to
tell the
identify 'em?
difference between northerns, Floridas, or
Okay.
F1s. They're all, you need to, like, genetic markers.
So it's an actual okay.
Yeah, you
I
got.
was always curious about that because like I hear about it, and again, I grew up 20 minutes from Champlain, and some of the stuff that they stocked in California came from just down the road because they started pulling our northern smallmouth, our northern largemouth out of Champlain to use for stocking programs.
Right.
So I was always curious, like if there was some sort of telltale sign. Like I know, like to be honest, I don't even know if I could tell you the difference between a spot and a largemouth because I've never seen a spot because we don't have them up here. So like, I see people that are like, "Oh, that's a spot," and I'm like, "Cool."
You were talking earlier about spotted bass, Shannon, and do you feel like this? Let's take the Flint River and the Flint River for purposes. It has the only species of bass that Georgia has exclusively to theirself is the shoalie.
Yeah.
Is the spotted bass in the next 10 years going to hurt that fishery on the shoalie side?
Probably. Spots are, well, I mean, again, it depends on your perspective. You know what I mean? Like, some people really like catching spotted bass. And we've got a problem with people who take spotted bass from bass fishing tournaments in live wells and move them around. When you don't want to do that, they tend to take over where you put them. And the problem is, it's like they're like, oh heck, I can't think of the right word. They'll like, you put spots in with smallmouths and they'll like cross up with each other, and you'll get like I think they call them a mean mouth.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen those.
You know what I mean? And if you put a spot in with another, they'll cross up with them too. You know what I mean? They're real, like, they really possess the ability to outcompete your native basses, and you just end up with a bunch of weird spotted, small, stunted spotted bass in most of your fisheries. And again, now you're into, how big is the fishery? 10,000, 12, 15,000, 20,000 acres.
Yeah.
And you need to remove 20 spotted bass per acre. Yeah. Who's signing up for that job? Yeah.
Who's supplying me all the jigs?
And bad news is you got a year, because in the spring they're going to spawn again, and then they're going to make more.
And you're right back behind 20 stacks again. Good luck with that. And again,
how many bass, like if a bass spawns, like I know like salmon, it's like thousands. Is bass the same way?
Yeah. It's like 8 or 10,000 eggs per pound they produce, I think. So the bigger the bass, the more the eggs, right?
That's a lot, yeah. Granted, a lot of those don't grow up necessarily because they get eaten, but still, even if a third, that's still a lot of fish in the water.
And that's the part too that people don't get. And until you start messing with bass in tanks and like watching them being bred, stocking them together, putting them in tanks and stuff, they eat each other. Yep. They don't care. They don't care. And they don't have to be very much bigger than another one to eat it too. You'd be really surprised. And I've had that, like, whenever you haul bass in a tank, you always get like 10 extra. Yep. Because somebody's getting smoked in a couple-hour ride.
Yeah,
it's the truth. Like, that's the part that the dudes don't get. And like where we started this conversation, when you've got a pond or a small lake skewed towards all those 1.5 pound bass, and it's just another and another and another, it automatically tells you don't have any 16 to 18 inch bass. 20-inch bass, because they hammer those.
Yep.
Absolutely decimate those. Oh, you want to be 12 inches long around 20, 22, 24? No, that's you done. They make glide baits about like that, don't they?
Yep.
You done.
Yeah.
And you see it, like,
Yeah.
again, that's my perspective that I think makes me a little bit different than most other fishing pages. Is that I've gone to 20 acre, 30 acre, 50, 100 acre lakes. I've thinned the bass populations down. I've watched them swing back and go from producing 1 pounders to producing, 6 to 8 pounders again through harvest, not through stocking, not through spending money, through a fillet knife and some fish fries and understanding fish population dynamics.
Right. So that leads into the next conversation, the catch and release. A lot of these pond people that build these. Let's take a plantation, for example, a bird plantation. Quail, pheasant. They have a pond on there. It's catch and release only, and they don't let their clients that pay for a bird hunt have fish as well. They just catch and release. Mm-hmm. It's the horriblest thing ever. Especially when you're talking even smaller bodies of water, 5, 10, 15, 20, over a 20-year period, if you're not catching any type of bass out of there, you're not going to have a client come and fish and expect to catch an 8-10 pounder out of there. Right?
Yeah, that's what's unfortunate about places like that. And really, based on my experience, and I've been a lot of places like that. I've seen a lot of things in 30 years, and I would say that the most misused resource is ponds, because really you can't really get guys to listen. They'll come on here, they'll listen to a podcast like this, they'll kind of selectively hear what they want to hear, and they'll go and they'll do what they want to do. They won't let you do your job all the way. And I can honestly say one of the reasons why we've gotten such good results at Sugar Hill is because when I took the job with Clint, I made it clear. I was like, look, man, this is actually really simple. We don't need to go crazy. And if you just stay this little simple course for a few years, you'll have real nice fish.
Yeah.
And don't go down the rabbit hole of the internet and all that. Just stay with what I do and be patient, and it'll be okay. And, he did. And it's really rare to find somebody like that. But when you do this stuff right, like I said, the pond fishing that you can have in your own backyard is so amazing, where you've got 8 and 9-year-old kids with bass heavier than their age. You got 8-year-old kid holding a 9-pound bass, just amazing. And then even like the fish around the feeder, I got to commend Clint at Sugar Hill. He's got the feeder going every day, and that creates that huge congregation of bluegill right there every day. And to his credit, anybody with 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old kid that wants to bring their kid fishing down there, he makes time for them to come down there and let the, crickets or worms or whatever. It's super easy. It's perfect for little kids like that. You get the pictures, they catch the fish quick, that, keeps their attention moving, gets them interested in fishing. And, I'm really proud to be a part of a project that's like that too, because so much of what I've done is all just, it's private, secret,
right?
Keep it, hidden type of thing, instead of share it type of thing.
Right. Go on. You grew up in Georgia, just like me. And I don't know about Mike growing up in Vermont and all that, but having so many places to fish down here, and you go knock on the door to the local farmer and saying, hey, you buy my fish? No, you can't fish that. Or you go to the next one down the street and you knock on his door. Yeah, you can fish mine. I just think that people don't take care of the resources like they did years ago right now.
Mm-mm.
You go out, I can go to the local river right now and probably pick up 20 worm cups that's left on the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what gives people that have these type fisheries and they're growing big bass and growing big brim to have, I guess, like kid days and things like that. Like Rutland Farms down in Tifton, Georgia, they have a big farm down there. They grow strawberries, peaches, everything down there. But they have ponds on there that they allow the public to fish.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the ponds are catch and release only.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I guess me working with this body of water that I've got now and figuring out you can't release all the fish back to be able to catch that 8, 9, 10 pounder in 3 or 4 years.
That's the part that's the most misinformation or misinformed part of pond management is because of what fishing on media. Like if I could switch one thing about tournament bass fishing, it would be that they added, because they're almost there. They don't even have to weigh them all. But if they just added the relative weight calculation and they just did it to every inch class of fish, like the 11 inch, 12, 13, 14, 15. And like I said, they wouldn't have to do it for every single fish that the tournament caught, but just make sure they did a couple fish in each size class and start measuring their fish the way I measure my fish and get my data. And when you start looking at that relative weight on the page, you see it jumps out at you. It's like, oh, wow, those 12 to 14 inch bass look thin, boys. Like what's going on right there, and then now you've got a group of guys that you can have an intelligent conversation with because they're all looking at the same data. Right now I'm looking at the data going, good Lord, look at your 14-inch fish. They look horrible. And I've got guys holding them up going, yep, that's a good, healthy one right there, and throwing it back.
Yeah.
And, and we're talking about the same fish.
Yeah.
We got lakes up here. We got this one lake that I fish that I go to make content because it's so loaded with largemouth that they up the limit to 5. Everywhere else in the state is 3. But no one eats bass. So like up here anyways, in the north it's very rare to find someone who actually cooks and eats bass.
That's normal everywhere. Yeah.
And the thing is the thing that irritates me the most is that they still stock this place with rainbows every year.
Yeah.
And it's like, I get it, but it pisses me off because as a taxpayer and as somebody who's funding these stocking programs, you're feeding the bass, which as a bass fisherman, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
I want these fish. Well, so the problem is this lake is clones. They are 14.5 inches. Every bass you catch is stringy and 14.5 inches. They are clones of each other because they can't get any bigger because there's no food. Right. So, but then they bring in these trout.
Right.
And I can tell you, I know when they're going to stock these trout, and the freaking bass know when they're going to stock these trout, because I will tell you, I will catch fish on the opposite side of the lake from the ramp right about when they start to get ready to stock those trout. All of those freaking bass are 40 yards from that ramp. They migrate. They know it's coming. They know the buffet is coming.
Yeah.
And they move and they hang out and they group up. And I can tell you, they're stocking next weekend because these bass have all moved from, it's an 80-acre pond, and they've moved from the other side of the pond about 20 to 40 yards from the ramp, because when they stock it, they just go and dump them at the ramp.
Right.
And then the next like week, every bass I catch has got a rainbow down its gullet.
They
got tails coming out.
Are there any predators on top of the bass there, like pike or
there is. So there is pike, and the only other thing that does help a little bit is there's bald eagles.
Oh yeah.
So, and there's portions of this pond, so it's probably 20 feet deep in the middle.
Yeah.
But the edges are like 2-3 feet, so it's shallow enough where those birds could come down. It's actually one of the coolest things I've experienced is, and I didn't know that. I found out there was eagles up close and personal. Had no idea. So I was fishing and I was like following a school of trout, and I was like, okay, I could see them blowing up. So I was like, I'm gonna fish around these guys because I know the bass are gonna come in. And I literally looked up and there was a freaking bald eagle, like National Geographic style, with its claws out, swooping down to eat a trout off the surface. And I felt the wind off of its wing come over the front of my kayak, and that's how I learned there was eagles there. I was not even paying. I wasn't even looking up. I was watching the swirling water and following it and fishing just behind it with a jig. And then all of a sudden I felt woof, and I look up and there's this bird. I'm like, oh crap!
Fish, got your fish,
and it literally caught a trout and took off with it. And I was like, oh crap! Like I had no idea they were there. I always wondered why there's a campground across the road, and they'd installed like 3 or 4 benches at the ramp. They did that so people could come down and watch the eagles eat.
right?
And people would come down every morning at daylight and sit there. I always wondered why there was this random people that would sit on these benches with no fishing rods, no tackle, nothing, and just hang out. Well, now I know, is they're watching the freaking eagles eat trout off the water. But
so, Shan, we got a question over here from Gremlin
Sure.
Fishing. Serious question now, Shan. Did you say that the copperhead nose bluegill take feed better, or was it another strand you were talking about?
Oh, that's Frank. He follows along.
Yeah.
Yeah, the copper nose are a pretty good strain, but again, where are you located? Where are you putting them? Because they're the southern strain, and I am using them in Georgia, and I'm actually probably using them a little far north from where they normally occur. But and I don't even know what reason why, but for some reason they tend to chew a little bit better on the feed. Sometimes you can get certain strains of bluegill that'll be, I guess, feed shy is the best way to. You go feed them you try to get your bluegill whipped up into you want to see like a piranha like feeding frenzy down at the end of the dock every evening, and sometimes certain genetic fish won't give you that. And those genetic fish are not copper-nose. Copper-nose feed like piranha.
Yeah.
So that's where you'll get into, say we were to drain go back to the hypothetical situation. You guys have 5-acre ponds. We're going to drain and stock. Oh, and there was a growth season question that we got sidetracked on. Let's touch on that too. Okay. So we drain, a pond in Georgia and a pond in Vermont, both 5 acres. Right.
Right.
We can get, it doesn't even really matter. Like I can get about the same amount of fish to grow in each pond, pounds per acre wise. Right. And that's called carrying capacity. Just like you can carry, 10 deer per acre in the woods, you can carry a certain amount of fish per acre in a pond. And in Georgia, it's usually real low. It's usually down like 100 pounds of fish per acre. But you can boost that up to around 400 pounds of fish per acre with feed. And I would imagine up in Vermont, you can do the same thing. Clear water, rocks, probably not super productive water. Probably a little better water quality than Georgia, but still I wouldn't expect, and I would kind of expect to be managing the same way. And we could boost them again up to, say 400 pounds of fish per acre. So if we had a 5-acre pond boosted like that, we'd be talking about 2,000 pounds of fish. That's what we would have in each 5-acre pond. Now, as those fish begin to grow, like we stock the bluegill first, and we let them grow in there for each pond for a year. Each pond will be full of 2,000 pounds of bluegill. Okay, the ponds will fill themselves, kind of like how water levels itself. The pond will fill itself. There's a certain amount of zooplankton. There's a certain amount of aquatic insects. There's a certain amount of bluegill, and it'll pretty much fill up to about that when it's fed to the carrying capacity of like 400 or 2,000 pounds, say. Now we add our bass. The bass start to eat the bluegill. So if we have 100 bass in 2,000 pounds of fish total and 100 bass that are averaging 1 pound, we have 100 pounds of bass. We're going to have 1,900 pounds of bluegill left.
Gotcha.
You see how that works? And
Yeah.
the bigger your bass get, the more they take away. It's like a seesaw. So our job is to manage that bass population and be like, all right, those 14, those 12s, 14s, those are skinny and too many numbers. Let's get rid of that, free up some hunting pressure on that part of the forage base, so the bluegill or a shad or whatever your forage base is for your area can grow a little bit more and give food off to the rest of these bass. That concept, what we just described right there, does not land on most guys common sense wise.
Now, out of curiosity, with carrying capacity, for example, like reptiles, frogs, does that count in that, or is it just bait fish that live in the water?
Yeah, I mean,
because we have like a lot of bullfrogs and stuff up here, and like one of the lakes I fish at, that's, I don't want to say that lake has catfish, bluegill, largemouth. You know, it's got a pretty good variety, pike. But I know, like, there is a place right in the main area that it's shallow. It's all lily pads. There's bullfrogs as far as I could see. And I know that just because I fish topwater a lot, that the bass are eating them because that's what they hit on the most.
Right.
I didn't know if, like, the bullfrogs, do they count towards the carrying capacity too? Or are those, like, kind of not part of the same? Okay.
But, you know, every area, like, could be a little bit different. You might be in an area of the country where maybe the crawfish are on, like, kind of steroids. You got a little higher population there, you know, or, you know, different things like that. Again, every area. So we're just kind of talking vague, but we missed it again. I'm going back and touching on it. So we're just talking about the growing season. When the water temperature gets above 65, where he's at in South Georgia, that's going to be soon.
Right.
Right? Where you are, that's going to be when? May?
4 months from now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's May, right? Probably.
Yeah, usually about Mother's Day. So our spawn up here is usually Father's Day. It's usually around that mid-June round. Sometimes late May, depending on how the winter went.
Right. So it's very possible, if the weather falls right in South Georgia, that we'll have kind of an average of that 60 degree and above, you know, in March. So you've got a March, April, right? There's 60 days right there. Now, in our ideal situation, when I've drained the pond down, I've done everything right, I've fed my bluegill, I've got your fish in Vermont, his fish in South Georgia, okay? I'm going to stock his fish, and they're going to begin to grow when the water temperature gets above 65 degrees. And they're going to grow at about 1 to 1.1 millimeters per day.
Okay.
In an ideal situation. And that's exactly what I got these fish to grow in Sugar Hill Outdoors. As a matter of fact, I measured them, I tracked them. And that when you do it right, you'll get that amount of growth. And it's like over, what is 7.7 millimeters, like an inch or so a week. You know, they're really growing like rockets, really, really, really fast.
Crazy,
yeah. Okay. So they're going to grow that fast in your pond, stocked at the same density in Vermont, the same amount of bluegill, the same amount of bass, stocked at the same predator to prey ratio with the same amount of fish per acre. You're going to get that 1.1 millimeter growth per day rate, but you miss 60 days. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so your growing season is smaller.
Yep.
Okay, now let's flip this around, though, to what's actually happening in the world, because, you know, I have colleagues that do this stuff all over. Up north, most of your lakes have ice fishermen that keep some bass. Most lakes have pike and muskie and bigger predators that eat some bass. Most of your northern lakes don't really have as stunted bass populations like southern lakes, and most of your northern lakes are producing at generally healthier, heavier bass population than southern lakes, despite the added growing season. And it's because of the balance. Now let's use your 2 ponds as here's another perfect example that just is like this on dudes. Okay. I've done this a lot of times, hundreds of times. We stock your 2 ponds, right? And we're going to stock 40 bass per acre. And that's going to get them growing that's what I did at Sugar Hill Outdoors. And that's going to get them growing at these rocket rates. Okay. Now, 1 pond stays balanced, doesn't have any fish come into it, is fed perfectly, everything's done right. And we allow it to grow, and we're going to see growth exactly like we're seeing right here, a couple 2.5 pounds for growing season, and the bass will just cruise right to 8, 9, 10 pounds really quick. The other pond could not happen. It could go like that, and about year 3, all the bass growth just tank. All that just goes away, right? Now, in 3, 4 years, 5 years, that's not enough to have a failure in habitat, right? They didn't grow great for 3 years and tank because all of a sudden your habitat went away, right? They grow and tank like that because the fish population changed. The balance of the fish population changed. And generally in ponds, it's crappie or green sunfish or some other kind of predator got into a small system and ate what the bass were eating, competed with the bass, and you watch the bass growing, and then boom, the bass are like, what happened to the bass growth? Okay, well, the one thing you can positive about a bass, if it has forage, it will eat it.
Anything.
Crush it.
Yep.
Like it will eat it and eat it and eat it and eat it. That is a guarantee. It's like dropping your keys. Your keys are, if you drop your keys, they're going to hit the table. And if there's food in the lake, there's forage in the lake, the bass will eat it. And that's what makes these standard weight charts that we use as scientists work. Like if your 15-inch bass isn't 1.8 pounds right there, okay, it's because there's not enough forage to make it 1.8 pounds. And it would be if the forage was there. It's a guaranteed factor. They're such killers.
So just going back to that 15-inch fish, if he's not reaching the 1.8 pounds, say he's underweight at say a pound, would you take that 15-inch fish out of there, or would you put him back and try to catch some smaller fish to kind of?
That's where you would take that's one data point. Okay. And that's what I'm talking about. You take a 15-inch fish out, you weigh it, it's 1.1 pounds. It should be 1.8 pounds. Okay. Are we going to make a decision about the entire lake management or pond management on that one data point? No. But if you had an entire bass club and you caught and measured every single fish that those guys did for the season like that, and looked down that list and went, oh, wow, look at that. All those fish in that slot right there are really thin. That's your slot limit. They're thin because there's too many. They're thin because there's not enough to eat. There's too many cows on the pasture.
Gotcha.
That's where you harvest. And you go in and you harvest that slot until you see them start to fatten back up. And like I said, it is the easiest math. It is 2 + 2 is 4. It's common sense, but it just has never been taught to anybody ever.
Right.
The
other question I had is the length of a bass. So does a bass's length signify its age? Like, for example, if I catch a 20-inch bass, is that always going to be older than a 16-inch bass? Or is it okay? That's how I personally started doing more measurement than weight, because I found that like up here being in the north, if I catch a bass in April, that bass is going to be 2 pounds, 3 pounds. Mm-hmm. I catch that bass at the spawn, that might be a 5-pounder, but he's always going to be 20 inches.
Right.
He can't get shorter. He can only get longer in my mind. So.
Right. Yeah. Generally speaking, now there's always exceptions to all of this stuff, right?
Right.
Okay. So let's just say we took your 5-acre pond and we stocked it, but we didn't stock any bluegill in it. We just stocked bass in it. Okay. And I've seen this happen in ponds. So what happens is there's not there's the bluegill population is not there spawning, providing forage. The bass are not getting the sufficient protein they need to grow. They're going to rely on whatever little minnows and bugs and lizards and frogs and anything around the pond. And it's not the population is not set up properly for them. Those bass won't grow. They'll get to about 6-8 inches, and that's as big as they'll get.
Okay.
When they don't have a protein source, they'll stop growing. Okay. And that's what I'm talking about in a stunted bass population.
That makes sense.
Right.
Okay. So if you say you go in and you stock your new 5-acre pond, not the way I recommend with 40 bass, but maybe you go in there with, say, 50 bass or even a few more than that, and you practice strict catch and release, you're not paying attention to the reproduction coming in. And a lot of ponds get into a situation where their 12-inch bass stay 12 inches for the next 10 years. Okay. Again, they can stunt out at different sizes. And you see a lot of stunted bass in the 11 to 14 inch size range.
That's, a lot of the lakes, a lot of the ponds I fish up here, that's what it is. And it's crazy because at the same rate, like you were saying, which actually makes a lot of sense, is I actually like fishing ponds more than fishing a lot of our bigger lakes here because there's 6 and 7 pounders in there.
Right.
And that makes sense because what you're saying is probably the carrying
because they can
probably
produce
plenty
them.
Of food.
The balance is the balance is correct, and the predator-prey balance is correct, so that it can actually be produced. So here's what I tell you. Here's what I tell everybody who follows on those lakes. If I'm going to catch numbers, if I'm going with kids or whatever, I'm going to those lakes that do those 11 to 14s, and you catch some 1-pounders all day long.
Right? Yeah.
If I'm going for weight, okay. And here's another tip: does the lake produce 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pound fish? Right. Maybe not every time you go, but one time you went out there and you caught like a 1 and a 3. And then one time you caught a 2 and a 4. And what I'm getting at is fish that didn't produce all 1-pounders, fish that produced a variety of sizes of fish. That's a sign of health. That's a sign of balance. That's a sign you're going to catch a bigger fish. That's at least a sign you have the potential to catch a bigger fish. Let's put it that way.
That makes sense. Yeah, because that means there's more of a variety. So that means that there's young fish that are growing up, and then there's also that makes sense.
Now, when we bracket that right there, and we take that idea, when we're dealing with ponds or lakes that produce a bass population of diversity of size, now what you just said about length is exactly true. Heck yes, a 20-inch fish, that's going to take you about 4 years to grow. 5 years where you're at, 3.5, 4 years back where I'm. It depends on what part of the where you're at. Right?
Yeah, because mine basically go in hibernation for
again. You have that kind of window where you're not getting growth in the spring and the fall where we are.
Yeah,
But again, that doesn't mean you can't grow great fish up north. We all know there's huge fish grow up north, just because of the shorter growing season doesn't mean Champlain doesn't crank out tank after tank.
Yeah.
But so we've been going for about an hour now. And unfortunately I got to get to work at 3:30 in the morning.
Oh Lord. Well, wrap it up.
And well, Shan, you got an Instagram, Aquatic Biologist.
Yeah.
Do you have a Facebook?
It's Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube is all Aquatic Biologist.
Okay. Hey, if y'all want some good content to listen to while driving in traffic or anything like that, go subscribe to his channels. He's got great content. He's got great knowledge and good stuff if you plan on growing big fish. Every time I try to get on everything I can with you. That way, I can learn a little bit something different every time. So
I'm definitely gonna be hitting you up because I probably have about another 750 questions that I'll probably blow you up on Instagram with.
Do it, man. Absolutely do it. I appreciate.
I geek out on the science stuff because it's cool. Like the more I learn, I think it's made me a better fisherman watching. Like you learn fishing, right? And you learn baits, but if you understand their biology, it makes you, in my opinion, I've learned a lot about how am I going to catch these fish? Well, if you know what their intentions are and you know what their motives are, you get down to the science of it, it does start to piece stuff together, and that's what I've started to learn. And one last question before I'm not going to let Daniel leave yet. So we have in Vermont, and I don't know if this is in the South or not, but we've started seeing fish with these like little black, the parasite dots all through them. And I don't know what they're called. Does that affect, like, so if I've never seen them in the bass, but I've seen them in like pike, I've seen them in the bluegill. Does the bass eating those, does that affect the health of the bass? Like, would that affect them at all, or is it just they just eat them and they just digest them and it's not a big deal?
It's a great point. It's a parasite, right? And I mean, we don't have to get down into whatever. There's only about 28 trillion different fish.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
like deer ticks in the woods. You know what I mean? Right. There's 50 different varieties of ticks alone. You know, same thing in the water. There's a bunch of different things going on. So you'll find the parasite problems will be real cyclic. They'll run with the weather, that kind of stuff. So on the years where you see a bunch of them, you're probably just dealing with some kind of weather cycle to them, you know, just natural cycle with them. In our ponds, I'll stock red ear sunfish, or sometimes they're called shellcracker. And the snail populations, right, are host to the parasites. Primarily, especially in ponds.
That makes sense because we reduce
the snail floating snail shells. Right, you know what I'm saying? You reduce the snail population with the shellcracker, and then you reduce the parasite population to your fish. Okay. But to answer it, do the parasites stress the fish? Absolutely, like any other natural thing that happens to them. You know, it could be stressors. You generally don't get like huge like fish population die-offs due to parasite outbreaks. They usually just cycle through, and pretty much once it cools off, they go away. You know what I mean? In the bigger bodies of water, right? In the bigger bodies of water, again, back to what we talked about earlier, they're gonna cycle through. There's nothing you're gonna do on a big lake to fix that. Now, if we've got my 2.5 acre pond and we've got some kind of weird, you know, thing, funky, like I don't know, ick. We can go get medicated feed. We can feed those fish. You see what I'm saying? What's the scale of the project? Right? A big 20,000 acre lake. No, that's going to cycle out. Whereas, again, two acre pond, completely different. Completely different.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I wanted to ask that because I've never really been. I've actually tried to talk to like Fish and Game and biologists here, and no one's really ever been able to answer that because I started seeing like every pike I catch has it. Almost every bluegill I catch has it. And I'm like, you don't see the bass with it, but I'm like, they're eating that stuff. So they've got to be ingesting it.
It's either trematode or I don't know, man. I'm drawing a blank on, and I don't do that stuff very much because in my world, if the fish gets sick and dies, that's okay. I account for it, and maybe I've got to restock for it or whatever, you know. Gotcha. But I mean, life goes on, things keep moving. I'm growing fish, you know what I mean? I'm kind of a fish farmer in that way. People pay me to grow bass, so that's what I do.
All right, yeah, no, thanks. I don't want to hold you up too much longer. I was always curious about that because I kept catching those fish like that. I was like, I wonder if this is because that's like my home lake, and I catch a lot of like my PB comes out of that lake. You know, I've caught in Vermont a 7.25 pounder out of there, which is a big fish for Vermont. You know, and it's like our state record's 10, so 7's getting up there in the size. So
sounds natural. I bet it cycles out.
Okay.
Well, thanks again, Shan, and
boys.
And hey, go follow him on his Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. He's got some good information for everybody out there. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.